Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleagues, the member for Halifax Needham, the member for Preston, for their insightful comments on this, and I will add to them as our caucus's justice critic, but I'm not sure there's anything entirely new. But I do want to highlight, especially in light of the conversation in the last few days in the House, where we see a real resistance on the part of government to examine anything to do with policing. I think that's why we're hearing more debate on this bill than we might otherwise hear, because we know that there are issues and we're not seeing any willingness to examine those issues, and SiRT is a place where we know that there are these issues, where we have so many examples that have already been brought up. So as my colleagues have spoken about, there is a very real perception that SiRT is not as independent as it could be. The 4 investigators on SiRT are all either current or retired police officers. Sometimes that makes sense, but in some part we would want community representation to be taking into account these very serious issues that get taken before SiRT. And, you know, I have to point out that as of July of last year, all 4 of those investigators were male and all 4 of them were white. And that certainly doesn't match the makeup of all the folks who are necessarily coming before SiRT, or the folks who are engaged by the issues that come before SiRT. There have been calls to hire civilian investigators, and to find other ways to incorporate those civilian and diverse voices, but to date we haven't heard a response to that, so I'm hopeful that maybe the minister will address that in his comments to close debate. Members of this House know, it bears repeating, but it's been said many times now, that the legacy of systemic racism in our province, Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, face significant barriers in access to housing, education, healthcare, employment, and in access to justice. And we know that those folks are more likely to be stopped by police. And when people are stopped by police and things go sideways, that's when SiRT is involved. And so we know that Black, Indigenous, people of color, by definition, will have a specific perspective and a valuable insight to offer into investigations undertaken by SiRT. And so again, you know, I rise to encourage the minister and the department to consider, particularly as we expand the incorporation of those voices. We heard SiRT commit to establishing a community liaison committee. We'd love to hear an update about that. We'd love to hear that that is happening, and if so, how it's happening, because we know that that kind of committee could be an important step towards including systemically marginalized voices and perspectives in the justice system. Extending SiRT's jurisdiction to other regions, which essentially is what this bill does. I understand there will be mirror legislation that would come into place in New Brunswick to allow that as well. Intensifies the stopwatch, if you will, on the need for those improvements. So we're not speaking against the bill, but we're saying we know all of these improvements need to be made to SiRT. We've advocated for them in the past, and particularly if we are exporting, as it were, this process, it's imperative that the process is a good one. I mean, Nova Scotia exports. We talk a lot about that in this House. We want to export the best. If we are offering help to another province, we want that to be the best help possible. We want that to be the best system possible. And so these suggestions are made in that light. These are some of the improvements we know. This is very much connected in a bigger way to the need that we have been pushing for to re-examine policing generally in Nova Scotia and those contracts. But this is a first step, and one that we believe needs to happen before we export SiRT, as it were. So our caucus will continue to look for those improvements. I look forward to the comments of the minister, and with that, I'll take my seat.